Hey everyone, welcome back to the table. Today we're going to look at Posthuman Saga, a game for 1 to 4 players, and it plays in about 30 to 120 minutes. So let's take this to the table and I'm going to tell you about it. Okay, so in Posthuman Saga, players are going to take on the role of a survivor who is attempting to complete missions in order to help their colony survive. So each player is going to be given a secret objective. And this objective has 2 missions in which you are trying to complete. These missions correlate to your sector, and this is a tile laying game. So you'll need to find and place any tile, then a city tile, and then a mountain tile to complete your first objective. And when that is complete, you'll be able to take an action to place these objective tokens onto the board. You'll also gain 2 experience when you do that. Your second objective is any tile, a forest tile, a rural tile, try to say that 5 times fast, and then a city tile. Once you've completed that, you'll go to the end game narrative story that will unlock a boss encounter for you to attempt to defeat. So, how do we go about completing this mission? Let's talk about our player board, and then we're going to talk about a turn. So here we have our starting stats. We have 6 morale, 5 health, 2 boost cubes for shooting. Boost cubes can be used and exhausted in order to add successes to your encounters. And then we have starting items. We have a combat knife, a hunting rifle, 2 food, and 2 ammo. And then it shows us starting with 2 of the development cards in the deck. So we are going to start with these 2 development cards, and you'll see that this development deck has a number of development cards in which players can spend experience points to upgrade and purchase new development cards to further progress their character. We have our cubes that track all of our related information. This is the token track where you can spend your tokens. This is the exhaustion pool. Here are the weapons we start with. Now, the durability of melee weapons, whenever you conduct a melee combat, you have to spend a durability cube, and so your melee weapons will eventually break, and so you're going to need to find new ones. We also have a deck of combat cards, and these combat cards will be used during combat encounters. You'll choose 1 card, it will get exhausted, and then you're going to choose a second card, and that card will add to your statistics, but will go back in your deck after it's drawn. All right, so let's take a look at a game turn. What are we trying to do? We are trying to complete these mission objectives. We're also trying to find these scavenge recon sites. And if you place your scavenge tokens on the tiles in your board in adjacent locations in these configurations, you'll gain a number of reputation points. So you want a lab and a gear in order to score 1, or a lab and 2 tires for 2, 3 smiley faces for 3, and then you see those 4 there for 5 points. Now, if you're able to lay those tokens in your sector in those configurations, you'll score additional reputation points. So the game plays in 4 phases. You have the event phase, the declare action phase, the resolve action phase, and the night phase. So during the event phase, what does that mean? This is when we are going to be able to draft tiles and determine turn order based on what round we're in. So you'll see this is a broadcast event, and this icon is a random intel event. So during broadcast events, players can bid their broadcast tokens in order to decide the player initiative order. Once that is complete, players will then take turns taking tiles from the center based on their turn order. And when a tile is taken, you take the tile and the adjacent scavenge token, and this is going to be refilled at the end of this phase. These tiles tell you the type, the threat level, and if you match the symbol on the tile with a matching scavenge token, you'll score an experience point. You can have a maximum of 4 tiles in your hand at the end of the round. Once players have finished drafting the tiles from the center, we'll refill these and we'll go into the declare action phase. If it had been an intel event instead of the broadcast event, we would draw the top card, and if a player had placed one of their intel tokens, and these intel tokens are gained by exploring these regions, if you place it in an intel region, that player gets to draw 2 of these events, chooses one, and reveals and resolves the top narrative. Otherwise, you resolve the bottom. It's a global event for everyone, and some of them are bad for players and others have no effect. So that's the difference between broadcast and intel. After you have finished your event phase, you're going to go into the declare action phase. Okay, so let's take a look at the 4 actions available to all players during the declare action phase. Now this phase is done simultaneously, so all players will select one of the 4 actions. They will resolve them in turn order. Okay, so the map action. The map action is going to allow you to take 2 broadcast tokens or to replace all the face-up terrain tiles in the middle. And then you get to draw a face-up tile from the middle and the corresponding token, and you can place any number of tiles adjacent to your current location. So in this instance, if we played the map action, we have 1 tile in our possession, and we could place a token on it, and we have now explored, and we have now gained that tile into our zone. The next action we have is forage. When you forage, you get to move, and then if the tile does not contain either a mission token or a safe zone, you get to forage for supplies. So when you move, there are 4 things you can do. You can move up to 2 adjacent tiles. You can place a tile and move into a tile. You could stay where you are, or you can wander. So let's say we move onto the city, and then we get to explore. So let's say we move onto the city, and then we get to forage. So when we forage, we're going to gain a weapon. In this instance, there are 2 different weapon decks. There is ranged and melee. Let's draw a melee weapon because, like we talked about earlier, these can break. So you have 5 slots in your player tableau that can hold weapons. So we would put 2 onto that weapon, and now we have a melee weapon we can choose to use during our melee combat phase if we have one. Okay, so let's take a look at the explore action. In the explore action, we resolve an encounter, and if we survive, we move. So we are in the first round, so we do not have encounter level 2 cards available. We would draw the top of the level 1, and this is the enemy that we are going to fight. This is a human encounter. So we need to determine if it's going to be a combat encounter or a narrative encounter. The way we do that is by looking at the tile type we're on, rolling a d6, and if it is higher than the threat level, we go into the narrative, which would be story 58. If it is equal to or less than, then we would go into combat. When a player goes to a narrative story encounter, the player to the left is going to read them the story that is labeled on the encounter. And this stat challenge is going to come from your mind statistic. There are varying levels of success inside the narrative stories. There are major successes, botches, and in order to determine your level of success, you'll take a bag and you're going to draw out up to 5 tokens from this bag, and a player can stop at any time they want. So the different types of tokens you can draw are the botched tokens, success tokens, and missed tokens. So after you have drawn your tokens, you will then add up whether it was successful or botched or missed, and then the player is going to read you the story text that follows based on your outcome. You're going to go through that progression. You'll gain whatever it's listed, whether it's going to hurt you with fatigue or lowering your morale or health, or giving you items such as followers, equipment, weapons, or just general experience points. So that's how you go through a narrative encounter. Let's go ahead and take a look at how a combat encounter would happen. And this particular character has both ranged and melee combat. So the first thing we would do is look for shooting. Your ranged combat always happens first. In this instance, this enemy is going to roll 1 blue die, and they're going to add their blue die stats, and he's fast. So we get -1 to our shooting, but we do have boost cubes that can help us succeed. So we would look at our Fleming rifle. It has a range of 3, he has a range of 2. We shoot first. We would have to expend 1 ammunition token. What we'll do is we will choose one of our combat cards. So we would want to, with a critical hit, add 2 successes, but he's fast, so he removes 1, so we just have 1 success. And then we're going to randomly select a second combat card to add to our stats. It's a miss, but this gets reshuffled back into our deck. So currently we have 1 success, which does not get us any damage, but we can spend one of our stat boost cubes to give us a success. So 2 successes is going to deal 1 damage to this creature. Unfortunately, it's not enough to kill it, so we would move into the melee combat. So what we do for melee combat is that we would choose one of our melee weapons to use. So let's choose this blade, and we would set our statistics and our enemy's statistics on this melee combat board. So we'll do that now. And we have a shield, a maneuver, and 2 damage. And then we're going to go through the same progression we did with ranged. We'll choose one of our cards to use. We'll do a hip shot. It's going to add 1 damage. And then we're going to randomly draw a second combat card, which is going to add another damage. And again, that gets reshuffled back into our deck. And then we're going to go into adding their dice. So the enemy is going to roll 2 dice. And we have a speed and a miss. So now we're going to go into the progression of damage. We would subtract speed, so right now it's 1 versus 1, and then we're going to subtract damage versus shields. So he would subtract 1 shield for 1 damage and 1 shield for another damage. And we would end up dealing enough damage to this enemy in order to kill it. So we have 3 damage and they're at 2 damage. So we gain 1 experience point. And that enemy has been defeated. And that is how combat is resolved inside Posthuman Saga, both for your ranged and melee. Now, cards that were played are exhausted. You can return exhausted cards when you take the camp action. So by taking the camp action, you're going to gain 3 recovery points unless you're in a safe zone. And this is the safe zone token, and you start in a safe zone. So these recovery points can be used a number of different ways. You can use them to recover exhausted cards, exhausted stat cubes, or to recover morale and health. So the camp action can come in very, very helpful. Now, after we took the explore action and we survived, we can move. If we had a tile to place, we could move onto it. Otherwise, we could choose to wander, and we could draw a tile and add it adjacent to us. We do not get to add the token, but we will take 1 fatigue, which will end up hurting us if we take too much. This does move us closer in our objectives because we have our any tile and we have our city tile. So now we just need to draw and place a mountain tile, which there are 2 mountain tiles out in the next round. So it is a broadcast event. We would want to win that turn initiative in order to get that tile to complete our objective. So after every player has resolved their actions, you'll go into your night phase. During the night phase, players will be allowed to spend their experience points for more development cards or better development cards. And if you're not in a safe zone, you'll have to eat or take a fatigue. So once all players have gone through the 4 phases of the round, you'll move into the next round. And players are going to continue to do this until a player wins. Either the game is going to end at 15 rounds or a player completes both of their objectives and they'll draw a boss that they can fight, which is determined based on the story narrative they read. And then if a player defeats the boss encounter, they would win the game. Now, the boss encounters are incredibly difficult. They have 4 rounds of combat as opposed to a few from just the regular encounter cards. So it is not easy. You will want to ensure that you are equipped up. You're going to want to make sure that you are healthy. You have strong development cards. Now, let's talk about what makes Posthuman Saga really interesting, and that is the mutation card. So if a player takes damage from a mutant, so this spitter would deal damage in the form of mutation cards. Mutation cards start as stable, they move into unstable. So once a player has drawn 3 mutation cards, each subsequent mutation card they draw gives them a minus reputation point. So you do not want to draw very many of them. However, these mutation cards are quite helpful as they will add new cards into your combat deck or will give you special abilities that you can use. As you get this DNA inside of you, you become stronger, you gain these abilities that normal human beings should not have, and you want to make sure that you're not taking too many of these, otherwise you are going to take negative reputation points. Depending on the tiles that you've placed into your sector, you'll have varying levels of options. When you take the forage action, you'll be able to gain food. When you go to rural tiles or in the mountains, you can find equipment, and equipment is going to help you in different encounters, whether it's combat or narrative, or they will also give you boosts when you use your action cards. Your development cards are going to give you asymmetric variable player powers that your character controls. So each player will have variable powers, and these development cards are going to allow you to take strong actions based on the decisions you make. So Posthuman Saga is a richly themed, thematic, narrative adventure game with tile laying, character progression, and combat against post-apocalyptic creatures. If Posthuman Saga sounds like a game that's interesting to you, make sure you take a look at the description below for a link to their Kickstarter page. This has been Derek with the Board Game Spotlight, and this has been your preview of Posthuman Saga.